Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 1st, 2022. Hi, that makes it April Fool's Day. Hey, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Gotcha. April Fool's Day. Wow, what a fantastic holiday. And everyone celebrates it so well. It's very well done. Oh, I have left the refrigerator open. Plenty of things going on in the background. A late start to the day today. April Fools, you don't have to get up and get on the bus. Kid, you got an appointment. Well, that worked pretty well. I fooled him on that one. He showed up today, 8:30 downstairs. So, sent him back upstairs for a little bit of rest, but that threw the schedule off, so a little bit of breaking of the fast still happening here. Oh, I see I got tea all over everything over here. That's good. None of the electronics so far, so just hang on a little while longer and we'll be able to get everything in non-working order by spilling all the food and drink on it. And, oh yeah, before I forget, I better set my alarms for all of the breaks today. Gosh, it's just so much fun to have the schedule thrown off. All things happening here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have to call a stop to things to call the production staff over here to finish up the packing of the lunch so that everything can happen here. Here, let me hand things off to you. I was actually packing it while, so this is ready to go, except we got to put the food in on top there, on top, separate from the cool stuff. Keep the hot side hot and the cool side cool. You see what I've done there? Mm-hmm. All right.
So this needs to go in and that's it?
Yeah, fold it over and stick it right on top of the plate there. Everything, you know, all these technical directions that go into preparing lunch. It's not just radio we do here at KITM World Headquarters. It's also taking this nice book here that we keep track of his homework in and spilling tea on it. So, all things happening this morning. All right, why not welcome a new Patreon patron today? That would be a great idea. Would any of you like to be that patron? Give me money, and then I'll welcome you. No, a new patron who was, I think, brought in by probably by our pleas during the impromptu Ask Me Anything segment yesterday. So thanks to our donor who prompted that exchange. And we welcome RB. That's how we'll identify this person, because that's how they're identified in the email from Patreon, saying RB has just become a patron. Welcome. Thank you. We appreciate it. And we should talk about this stuff more often so that more of you are motivated to help support the show. And I think if I was going to say, if everybody who was listening every day, well, and then, you know, if they gave X amount of money, why, we'd be so wealthy. Well, you know, we'd be doing all right. Everything would be nice. Things would be better. More money could exchange hands for the people who help support the show with work each day, like Scott Anderson does. But then I realized, you know, I still am not really 100% sure what I'm looking at when I look at the statistics. Keeping track of how many people listen to the show and how often is strange and difficult and misleading, and the statistics don't tell you much. But I guess what ends up happening is you go and you look at the statistics, and like an idiot, you know, you look at, well, how many people download the show each day? And on average, you can tell approximately how many that is. And it's good, it's fine. We're doing, you know, what appears to be in excess of well over 1,000 and inching ever closer each day toward 1,500 downloads each day. But then when you, that's just looking at the graphs that tell us, and then looking granularly into the statistics and showing the actual raw numbers on downloads per show, that number is somewhat smaller. And so what appears to be happening is that, you know, some still significant number of people are downloading each show each day, which is great and kind of what you would expect. But then I guess a significant number of people download other shows each day too. And I don't know, it just strikes me like it can't be the case that people keep arriving to the show and saying, I'll download 3 shows at a time and listen to them. And then they go away or something and they come back. I'm not really certain how it works this way. Like, you can have an average of 1,500 downloads a day, and 900 of them are eventually downloads of each particular day's show, but then also a couple of other ones too. And it just makes it difficult to know how many people are listening. And well, one good way of making taking measure of how many people are listening is how many people say, by giving you say $5 to $10 to $50,000 each month to register that they're listening. Well, that's one way of counting up, but that number, of course, far smaller. I need to update every day. I feel terrible. Also, this, I guess, has to do with more of the questions asked in yesterday's AMA. I don't mean to do this again, but the question of why it takes so long to get the show posted for the podcast version of the show posted. And part of it is that I spend part of each day looking at the tape. It's not really tape, but looking at the recording and then inserting those little fake commercials that we make for ourselves. I don't know why I'm saying we're plural here, but at any rate, the little ads where I say, oh, hey, contribute to the show, either by, you can subscribe to the show. That's the fun thing that we like to talk about the most. And then the second most important thing that we like to talk about the most is contribute to the show by sending your own actual recorded contributions to the show, like not the money, but hey, I recorded this thing and you should play it on the show. That's always great. Like today, you could play one and finish packing lunch, right? And no one would be any the wiser. But today we don't have one like that, so we can't do it. Now you can see the importance of doing things like this. Anyway, each day I insert those things into the breaks, and each day I say, it's been forever since I recorded a new one. Why don't I just record some new ones? How hard could it be? You do 2 hours unscripted radio, and then you're like, I don't know, a minute. That seems pretty tough. But you want it to fit in the minute. You want to be sure it fits in the minute, so you tend to script it, and you script it, and it feels weird. And not only that, but as you're putting together the show and realizing everybody's waiting on this thing, and you realize, I'll just use the ones I have already. And then you get the thing done. And then you're like, I'm tired of sitting at this microphone already. I'm not going to record this new. What's one more day until I record a new announcement for the break? And it goes on and on and on and on. And for some reason, it's just, and then during the day, things are happening, and I'll record it now. Oh, no, the dishwasher is running. That's going to ruin the sound. The washing machine is running. It's going to ruin the sound. There's somebody building a deck now directly outside the window because they're building the stairs and run right alongside our place. So they're practically in the studio right now building this deck. Can't record a new one. If I was recording a new one, why, I'd tell you that, I tell you how many people were contributing via Patreon. How about that? I can do that right now and update you on this. In fact, I opened this up the other day because I was thinking of getting ready to, do this again and make another announcement. And then I realized the news was bad, and I didn't know whether I wanted to announce that or not. I think in the last one that I recorded, which was been back in October of 2021. So it's been, or was it 2021? 2020. I don't even know. But at any rate, the numbers usually are supposed to go up, That's the thing. That's the weird thing about these things. I think the last spot that I recorded was definitely October. And whether it was 21 or 20, I am not sure. But I think there were actually more contributors contributing more money at that point, and the news was so good. Oh, yes, over 175 monthly donors. And I think that still plays each day. And for various reasons, people drift away, run into financial trouble, just say, I'm sick of supporting you, but I keep listening to you all the time. We're currently at 168 patrons. So, We're down some number. And we're down some number in the monthly contributions as well. So, that was kind of a downer, so I didn't announce it. But it's true, so here I am announcing it. And maybe that will work to motivate more of you to join in and pitch in a couple of bucks. And, at $5 a month, it's basically like, well, I used to say the price of like a can of soda at a vending machine, but that was so long ago when we first started the show. And now you can't get it. And plus, when you go to a vending machine, hardly any of them sell cans anymore. You got to buy the 16-ounce bottles. And then these are machines that take credit cards now, Bitcoin, for God's sake. And as a result, inflation, Joe Biden, yada, yada, yargle, bargle, my pillow, something, something. Now a bottle of Coke is $750,000. It's just crazy out there. So anyway, hey, happy April Fool's Day. One of the worst holidays going, if you ask me. I've never enjoyed it because no one has ever really done a good April Fool's joke that I've been able to witness. All I see on Twitter, for instance, is fake stories. And during the Trump era, it was very difficult to tell which stories were fake and which were not. And that was quite annoying, and that was really Donald Trump's fault. So, we can blame the badness of the day on him if we want. But mostly, and I've commented on this in the show before, mostly I run into these jokes that my kids were making when they were 5 years old, where somebody just asserts something that could be true and isn't really particularly outlandish, and then says, no, that's not true, April Fools, and very pleased with themselves they are, smiling and sure that they've been in compliance with the spirit of the day, and it really isn't. To the extent that making a false assertion and seeing if you can get people to fall for it is ever funny, it should be something that is at least obvious to some people that can't possibly be true. And what a sucker, that guy fell for it. But stuff like, hey, you know what? I really love peanut butter and jelly. April Fools, I'm allergic to peanut butter. Gotcha. That's the kind of stuff that my kids would do. I don't know. Anyway, I haven't even seen anybody attempting to make, I don't think they've been attempting to make April Fool's jokes today, unless the jokes are so bad that I just haven't been able to tell that that's even what they are. I don't know. Well, at any rate, I've already read Bill's morning tweet to you today. Ha! April Fools. I have not, but it is here, and I might as well read it to you. Ha! You'd be better off if I didn't. Ha! Again, double April Fools. You would really be sad if I didn't share it with you. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is truly, no more jokes. This is it. I'm reading it to you. Kagro X promises he won't do any dumb April Fool's pranks today. I'm already blowing that one. Nope, you're getting only top shelf ones, like, look in your shorts. They're full of creamed corn. You don't know. Now, if you could pull that off and only have them notice that they were, in fact, full of creamed corn when you pointed that out, that really would be a masterstroke as far as April Fool's jokes go. All right. Well, let's see. All right. Oh, that's right. Good point. Rebecca Romans points out, don't forget those of us who listen live every day. That's true. Not just April Fool's Day, or who download a couple of shows afterwards. By the way, just in case, I don't want to offend anybody, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I don't want to forget those of you who listen live every other day, because, that's a personal lifestyle choice, and who am I to judge? Quite honestly, if that's the way you want to handle things, that's fine. There are probably more than one podcast out there that you really love, right? Brian Monroe asking, did I tune into PBS during Pledge Week? Just kidding. Kidding, get it? April Fools, you haven't. But the fact that you thought that you did, you didn't. I see what you're doing there. It's an April Fool's joke. Okay. Well, he ends with a little message. Subscribe to KITM. You should. And if you did, I don't know what would happen. I'm sure I would be doing this anyway, because why aren't there more people doing it? That's always a good question. All right. I know you're here for news. I don't have any. April Fools. I do. There's plenty to go around. Let me start off with, I don't know what, garbage. Stuff that you're going to hate to hear. For instance, one thing I happened to notice this morning, Hunter Walker tweeting this morning. Although, even as I bring it up, I'm like, well, does this really matter? But let's see. What do you think about whether it matters or not? This is Hunter Walker tweeting that he has just come across this photo. It's displayed right in the tweet where he says it. This photo that appears to show Lauren Boebert in the VIP section at the January 6th rally, just behind Mike Lindell and Mike Flynn. Boebert, who had just been elected to Congress at that point, was also visible in the C-SPAN feed. Now, as it turns out, this was spotted earlier on, but I guess nobody made a very big deal out of it. If you scroll down a little bit, there are some commenters to this who point out this was noticed on the day of, or at least this photo was tweeted around on the day of. Somebody, Mike Lindell or Flynn bragging about being there, and but not Lauren Boebert, I guess, at that point, bragging about being there. And but then Sedition Hunters retweeted it a couple of weeks later when they were looking for people to be identified in the picture. I say it doesn't matter to a certain extent because it occurs to me, like, what does it prove? Lauren Boebert is a known idiot. And it's a little surprising that there would be members of Congress at the rally, given that, the rally then turns into an insurrection attacking Congress. But they were, I guess you can separate the two events in your mind. But I thought she would be somewhere else. I thought she had something else to do that day. But I suppose she could have been there for the 8 o'clock a.m., 10 o'clock perhaps a.m. speeches. Pardon me as I catch up on the tea drinking here. And then quickly shuffle down the street to the Capitol for the business of obstructing from the inside the Electoral College count. Others point out that there are more members of Congress, new members of Congress there than just Lauren Boebert, but I don't know exactly who all of them are. But a couple of them are identified here in the thread. Maybe if I click on the show more replies. Let's see. At one point, somebody says, "Oh, my member of Congress is there too," and circles the man, and then, but accidentally, just draws a bad circle and loops in somebody else too, and it's a little confusing as to who is who. But at any rate, I'll provide you with the link to the thread. It's now growing so that I can't find any of the things I was referring to earlier about who's who here. I'm going to keep clicking on more replies because just to see if... Of course not. So now there's so many replies that I'll never find the one I was looking for with the guy who was circled. Also appearing in the picture is a person looking like a little bit like a very much older and more haggard Marjorie Trader Greene, but it's not her. It's just someone who kind of looks like her in another couple years, couple decades perhaps. At any rate, let's see. Oh, there's the circling. And where's the one about the explanation of, okay, who that actually is? Yeah. All right, well, not as readily apparent as it was a while ago. I should have put it all aside. Now I feel like a fool. But at any rate, I wondered whether this makes any difference in terms of... It certainly won't make any difference in terms of the way you and I think of Lauren Boebert, but it does perhaps bring up some possibilities about exactly what Lauren Boebert knew about the nature of that rally and when did she know it. And then, of course, she runs back to Congress and starts tweeting. What time were her tweets? Does it say in this screen cap of the things? No. But she went back to the Capitol building tweeting that it was today is 1776 and then, of course, tweeting out the whereabouts of the speaker when the speaker had been removed from the chamber at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So she was everywhere. Oh, yeah, well, in that morning, I guess, let's see, 7:52 a.m. on January 6th. Remember these next 48 hours. these are some of the most important days in American history. And then later on, today is 1776 at 8:30 a.m. But by that point, she should probably already be in place for the rally. So she may have been tweeting that from the rally, which is kind of interesting as well. Oh, I guess they're going to have some questions for her. All right, so that's something to keep an eye on. Let's move over to what people have already kept an eye on and reported about. There are many such additions to tack on here. Let's see. Something we mentioned yesterday, but now has been more fully reported on. Why don't we start there? We mentioned yesterday when we were speaking with Greg that Mick Mulvaney, who had just been hired by CBS as an analyst for I don't know what, but, well, he used to be OMB director, so they hired him to analyze the Biden budget, which makes a certain amount of sense, except that he's, a criminal, basically, and an insurrectionist, and not to be trusted, and a serial liar as well, and just not a very bright person overall, and maybe that's not who you want analyzing the news. And we kind of made mention of this. This was pointed out to me via Twitter yesterday. I think in time for the show, but I don't think I got it out in between our exchanges. But that it was Mick Mulvaney who arranged the phone call, the perfect phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky in, what was it, July of 2019. And it was, of course, arranged by him while he was still acting as acting chief of staff at that point. But he had to arrange the call because the national security advisor at the time, John Bolton, wanted nothing to do, apparently, according to his story. Now that it's a huge criminal enterprise, he wanted nothing to do with it. He might not have wanted anything to do with it at the time. He's, I think clued in enough to know that there was something wrong with what was going on. So Mulvaney steps in and arranges the thing, which I guess would fall to him as acting chief of staff anyway. But that's the plain fact, that he has arranged an event that's central to the news of the day then, the news of the day now, the first impeachment of Donald Trump. Those should all go in the cons column. Like if you're doing the pros and cons of hiring Mick Mulvaney at CBS News. Well, he was he was central to organizing the event that led to the impeachment of a president. Maybe we shouldn't hire him. All of that's now extensively documented by the folks at the New York Times, including your favorite publication, Armando, I know, including Maggie Haberman, your favorite writer. What an ironic twist. So for April Fool's Day, April Fools, this is good reporting. Okay. Behind the Ukraine aid freeze, 84 days of conflict and confusion. And this is one of those interactive pieces that takes place in real time. So I'll see you in 84 days when we're done reading it. But for now, the inside story of President Trump's demand to halt military assistance to an ally shows the price he was willing to pay, and he's never willing to pay a price, to carry out his agenda. The price, of course, is exacted from everybody else. That's why he's willing to pay it. That is to say, he's not going to pay it. So, anyway, looks like a rather lengthy piece, and it being almost time for our first break, because I wasted the first segment on talking about nonsense, including the lunches I was preparing. We'll continue it after the break. But let's start now. Deep into a long flight to Japan aboard Air Force One with President Trump, Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House chief of staff, I haven't used the sound effect yet, dashed off an email to an aide back in Washington. And luckily, it's all wrapped up in this one little nugget, I think. So even if we never get back from commercial, the world blows up in between, right? Here's the email. I'm just trying to tie up some loose ends, Mr. Mulvaney wrote. Did we ever find out about the money for Ukraine and whether we can hold it back? Right? So Mick Mulvaney doing more than just arranging the phone call. Remember, he's also OMB director, Office of Management of the Budget, right? Management and Budget. And that means he's carrying out as acting chief of staff Trump's desire to have the phone call, but also Trump's desire to pull off this extortion move. And as OMB director, he's the one pulling the levers to make sure that the money that Trump wants to withhold from Ukraine as blackmail can actually be withheld. He's the brass tacks guy as well, making sure that the money doesn't go. This was June 27th, more than a week after Mr. Trump had first asked about putting a hold on security aid to Ukraine, an embattled American ally, and Mr. Mulvaney needed an answer. The aide, Robert B. Blair, replied that it would be possible but not pretty. Expect Congress to become unhinged, by which, of course, he means, I guess, to go crazy. Like they're not really entitled to be upset about this. Although I think he's realizing right there, well, yeah, they'll become unhinged because they know that they appropriated this money and there's really supposed to be very little the president can do to stand in the way. But there are mechanisms, and he's just not using any of them. He's just simply saying, let's not send the money. So expect Congress to become unhinged and impeach you as well. If the White House tried to countermand spending passed by the House and the Senate, he wrote in a previously undisclosed email. And he wrote it might further fuel the narrative that Mr. Trump was pro-Russia, which is more than a narrative. It's just true. Mr. Blair was right, even if his prediction of a messy outcome was wildly understated, right? Unhinged, impeached, yeah. It was understated. I think it's a nice way of putting it. Mr. Trump's order to hold $391 million worth of sniper rifles, you think they need those now? Rocket-propelled grenades, night vision goggles, medical aid, and other equipment that the Ukrainian military needed to fight a grinding war, which was already happening, against Russian-backed separatists would help pave a path to the president's impeachment. Congress doesn't become much more unhinged than that. We'll be right back after 2 minutes to tell you the rest of the story.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's continue reading this lengthy New York Times piece about what exactly Mick Mulvaney was involved with as he was still working as acting White House Chief of Staff with respect to the arrangements with Ukraine that led to the president's first impeachment, should lead to a third impeachment with him now, despite the fact that he's out of office, of course, because of the now escalated war. It was already going on, and he intervened to hurt Ukraine. And now, of course, an open invasion of the rest of Ukraine, not just the Donbas regions or Luhansk regions, or both, but the entirety, and depending on which strategy you believe Putin had adopted from the beginning, either he meant it or he didn't. Well, at any rate, it was Mick Mulvaney, newest hire by CBS News, responsible for signaling the Russians that it would be okay to do whatever they wanted there. So where were we? Right. Mr. Blair was right, even if his prediction of a messy outcome was understated. $391 million worth of really important military aid and medical supplies that could have made a big difference then, and likely made a big difference in terms of their preparedness now, and having fallen behind in collecting the war materials they would have needed to fight even more effectively now. The Democratic-led inquiry into Mr. Trump's dealings with Ukraine this spring and summer established that the president was actively involved in parallel efforts, both secretive and highly unusual, to bring pressure on a country he viewed with suspicion, if not disdain. And there was disdain, so we might as well just say that. Interesting way of putting it, too. I don't know whether they're talking about pre-impeachment inquiries, which it really doesn't matter what it was. I mean, as it happens, Democrats had a majority in the body, and it's a congressional investigation, despite the fact that it was Democrats leading it. I guess, if anything, it was the congressional, like the official branch of the United States government, the legislative branch of the United States government, was investigating the president. But Republicans, because of party reasons and partisan reasons, were refusing to participate in or actively trying to undermine the investigation. But instead, that's kind of awkward, so they take the opportunity to say instead that it was a Democratic-led inquiry, even though it was led by Democrats who just happened to, own had an ownership of the majority leadership role in the Congress. We went over this before, that at the time, people were saying, well, the Democrats impeached him. Now, Congress impeached him. Republicans tried not to impeach him, but they lost because they didn't hold a majority. Congress was acting, and you don't get to just attribute it to one party or another in an official act like that, just because you feel like you want to disown it, even when there are no Republicans crossing the aisle. But there were Republicans crossing the aisle, so you don't even have that excuse. Anyway, water under the bridge, except it keeps happening. We just keep crossing the same bridge every time. One campaign spearheaded by Rudolph W. Giuliani. Have you ever heard of him? The president's personal lawyer. Aimed, at least they don't call him former mayor of New York anymore, or America's mayor. Jeez. One campaign spearheaded by Rudolph Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, aimed to force Ukraine to conduct investigations that could help Mr. Trump politically. The one, including one focused on a potential Democratic 2020 rival. You know who it was? Former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. The other, which unfolded nearly simultaneously but has gotten less attention, was the president's demand to withhold the security assistance. By late summer, the two efforts merged as American diplomats used the withheld aid as leverage in the effort to win a public commitment from the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, to carry out the investigations Mr. Trump sought into Mr. Biden and unfounded or overblown theories about Ukraine interfering in the 2016 election. And this is a good and subtle point here, that there were many reasons why Trump was doing what he was doing, and it might only have been an afterthought to connect withholding the aid, which he wanted to do anyway because he just didn't like Ukrainians. But why not, right? And I think the answer largely comes from his affinity for powerful Russians, oligarchs, Putin himself, etc. And as Greg has been explaining, it's just been a long-standing tension that exists between Russia and Ukraine, and many prominent Russians apparently just generally hold Ukrainians in disdain, or at least view them with great mistrust. And there's a long record, even before the call with Zelensky in 2019, of Trump just saying that Ukraine is particularly corrupt, or there's something that's particularly wrong with the country versus Russia, which is equally corrupt, probably more corrupt, but Russians aren't going to say that about themselves. They'll say Ukraine is worse, and that rubbed off on Donald Trump. And then I guess he figured, oh well, I want to withhold the aid anyway. One, because Russia probably would prefer that we withhold the aid. Two, because the Russians have indoctrinated me and taught me to distrust Ukraine. And three, oh yeah, well here's this other reason. Even if I can't necessarily prevent the money from getting there eventually, I can at least screw around with the mechanisms and try to leverage something out of the Ukrainian president. So why don't I try and do that? Back to the story. Interviews with dozens of current and former administration officials, congressional aides and others, previously undisclosed emails and documents, and a close reading of thousands of pages of impeachment testimony provided the most complete account yet of the 84 days from when Mr. Trump first inquired about the money to his decision in September to relent. What emerges is the story of how Mr. Trump's demands sent shockwaves through the White House and the Pentagon, created deep rifts within the senior ranks of his administration, left key aides like Mr. Mulvaney under intensifying scrutiny, and ended only after Mr. Trump learned of a damning whistleblower report and came under pressure from influential Republican lawmakers. In many ways, the havoc Mr. Giuliani and other Trump loyalists set off in the State Department by pursuing the investigations was matched by conflicts and confusion in the White House and the Pentagon stemming from Mr. Trump's order to withhold the aid. Eventually we'll get around to this, but mention of the State Department reminds me of the campaign that they conducted to get rid of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, someone who was actually, thoroughly knowledgeable in Ukraine, its history, the tensions between it and Russia, the weird position that put everybody else in, but also that she was a guardrail of, actual establishment, rule of law type procedure that stood in the way of their pulling off this shenanigans. So she ends up being, she should have been collateral damage to their plan, but that ends up requiring their complete focus for a while. So they shift focus and expend far too much energy trying to get rid of her in order to clear the path to do their other dirty work and then cover up that dirty work to the best of their ability. They wanted to get rid of somebody who would be likely to try to thwart them and to watch them carefully, even if she couldn't thwart them, and make reports in official channels that would land them in trouble, or at least potentially land them in trouble. So they'd look to erase her in the middle of all this. Opposition to the order from his top national security advisors was more intense than previously known. In late August, Defense Secretary Mark T. Esper joined Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John R. Bolton, the national security advisor at the time, for a previously undisclosed Oval Office meeting with the president where they tried but failed to convince him that releasing the aid was in the interests of the United States. But I wouldn't hear of it because Russians taught me what to think about Ukraine. I mean, it could happen to anybody, I guess, if you spend enough time with Russians, but it shouldn't happen to somebody who ends up as president of the United States. He was just susceptible to this because he's of particularly weak mind. But this is pure and simple Russian indoctrination of a mark on the American side, and it just happens to be that the mark is the president of the United States. It must have been like, that we are so lucky here in Russia. I can't believe that this crap worked. Usually, we try this on everybody, but we've never run into somebody who was so stupid and feeble-minded before, and how lucky is that? And how lucky is it that we put him in the presidency? And what a stroke of genius that was for us. But it really worked. They were surprised. By late summer, 2 lawyers at the Office of Management and Budget who had spoken to lawyers at the White House and the Justice Department in the weeks beforehand were developing an argument, not previously divulged publicly, that Mr. Trump's role as commander-in-chief would simply allow him to override Congress on the issue. A very Republican doctrine. And very much in line with many of the other things that they do. There's no clear support for that notion. They just sort of feel like, well, commander-in-chief, and this is kind of like military-ish aid, right? We're not sending the military there, but it's military stuff. Besides which, during the George W. Bush administration, they very clearly got away from, limiting things to military chain of command. Commander-in-chief, under several different circumstances under the Bush administration, they tried to push the idea that means he's commander of everything. That's the whole point of the in-chief. Well, it's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, if you just read the document. But they just cut that out, just like the necessity for a well-regulated militia gets cut out of the Second Amendment. This gets cut out of the commander-in-chief clause. He's just the commander of everything. And that's lunacy, but it's not lunacy if you think you can put together 5 votes on the Supreme Court, right? So let's try it. So by late summer, the top lawyers at OMB, speaking to lawyers at the White House and Justice Department, are putting together this new argument, not previously divulged publicly except for the entirety of the George W. Bush administration, that Trump's role as commander-in-chief would simply allow him to override Congress on the issue. And Mr. Mulvaney is shown to have been deeply involved as a key conduit for transmitting Trump's demands for the freeze across the administration. The interviews and documents show how Mr. Trump used the bureaucracy to advance his agenda in the face of questions about its propriety and even legality from officials in the White House Budget Office and the Pentagon. I've lost the track of this thing because there's plastic cups bouncing around or something. They showed that Trump used the bureaucracy to advance his agenda in the face of questions about propriety and legality. Fine. Many of whom, the questioners that is, say they were kept in the dark about the president's motivations and had grown used to convention flouting requests from the West Wing. So they wore everybody down, which was part of their plan as well. One veteran budget official who raised questions about the legal justification was pushed aside. Everybody got pushed aside. Vindman, everybody. Those carrying out Mr. Trump's orders on the aid were, for the most part, operating in different lanes from those seeking the investigations, including Mr. Giuliani, that is the improper investigations that he was looking for to set in motion in Ukraine, not the Democratic-led investigation of what happened. So those carrying out the orders on the aid, trying to block it, were, for the most part, operating in different lanes from those seeking the dirt from Ukraine, including Giuliani and a number of senior diplomats, including Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the European Union, and Kurt Volker, the State Department's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. By the way, why was there a special envoy for Ukraine and Russia? Because there was already a war going on between Ukraine and Russia. It's not a new thing. It didn't just happen last month. And now that it's April, last month is March. It didn't happen the month before last. This was going on, as you know, since 2014 when the Russians moved into Crimea, and even perhaps earlier than that when they were meddling in the eastern provinces of Ukraine. But there's a special envoy even at this point because there's a war going on. But, Donald Trump, I didn't even realize there was a war going on. I just want to hold up military aid for them for no reason. The New York Times found that some key players are now offering a defense that they did not know that the diplomatic push for the investigations was playing out at the same time that they were implementing the aid freeze. Or if they were aware of both channels, they did not connect the two. There's not a whole lot going on between the United States and Ukraine, really. There's only 2 lanes. They're connected. Mr. Mulvaney is said by associates to have stepped out of the room whenever Mr. Trump would talk with Mr. Giuliani to preserve Mr. Trump's attorney-client privilege, leaving him with limited knowledge about their efforts regarding Ukraine. Oh, that's an interesting aspect of things. Mr. Mulvaney has told associates he learned of the substance of Trump's July 25th call weeks after the fact, even though he arranged it himself. Yet testimony before the House suggests a different picture, and so does common sense. Fiona Hill, a top deputy to Mr. Bolton at the time, told the impeachment inquiry about a July 10th White House meeting at which Mr. Sondland and Mulvaney had guaranteed that Mr. Zelensky would be invited to the White House if the Ukrainians agreed to the investigations, an arrangement that Mr. Bolton described as a drug deal, according to Ms. Hill. Remember that? Along with Bolton and others, Mulvaney and Blair have declined to cooperate with the impeachment investigators, don't forget that about Bolton, and provide information to Congress under oath, an intensifying point of friction between the two parties as the Senate prepares for Mr. Trump's impeachment trial. I don't know why they're writing it as though that was in the present tense. Is this an old article? Is that what I'm reading? That's I should have checked the date on this thing. Where is it? Yes, it is, in fact, an old article published December 29th, 2019, and updated July 29th, 2021. How about that? I didn't even realize that we were reading an older article. This should be getting republished now in light of the Ukraine war. But I guess that's why they weren't discussing it at this point. Okay, so, along with Bolton, others, Mulvaney and Blair have declined to cooperate, and they never did resolve any of that. But, okay, moving on with this old new news. At the center of the maelstrom was the Office of Management and Budget, a seldom scrutinized arm of the White House that during the Trump administration has often had to find creative legal reasoning to justify the president's unorthodox policy proposals, like his demand to divert Pentagon funding to his proposed wall along the border with Mexico. Yeah, that didn't work out either. In the Ukraine case, however, shock about the president's decision spread across America's national security apparatus, from the National Security Council to the State Department and the Pentagon. By September, after the freeze had become public and scrutiny was increasing, the blame game inside the administration was in full swing. I'm really astonished now that I didn't notice that. I mean, this came attached. The reason it's in pocket here and now is that it was attached to a tweet from, I don't know exactly what tweet, but from the last day or so. So somebody else looked it up and said, yeah, this is actually comprehensive and important background for what's going on now. And it makes sense. I would have retrieved it myself if I had known that the article was hanging out there. We may even have read it at the time when it came out. We certainly knew the information that was in here. But I just thought this was being brought up in the context of the renewed state of war between Russia and Ukraine, and that everybody should know that Mulvaney was the guy who, he's entangled in all of it, and now it's become a disaster once again, and CBS News is here hiring the guy. And I'm sure that's what the tweet was about. But now I'm just extra appreciative of this detail, and it's good sometimes to go back and read the old sources rather than the rehashes about it, because they leave out all the detail the second time around and just say everybody remembers this stuff, right? Or sometimes they'll link back to it. So this is good reading. I think we should continue. So where were we with this? Yes. In the Ukraine case, however, remember, at the center of the maelstrom is OMB, operating kind of, out of below people's radar, and that they have been extra busy during the Trump administration trying to help engineer his questionable attempts to move money around without congressional approval. In the Ukraine case, however, shock about the president's decision spread across America's national security apparatus, from the National Security Council to the State Department and the Pentagon. By September, after the freeze had become public and scrutiny was increasing, the blame game inside the administration was in full swing. On September 10th, the day before Trump changed his mind, a political appointee at the budget office, Michael P. Duffy, wrote a lengthy email to the Pentagon's top budget official, with whom he had been at odds throughout the summer, about how long the agency could withhold the aid. He asserted that the Defense Department had the authority to do more to ensure that the aid could be released to Ukraine by the congressionally mandated deadline at the end of that month, suggesting that responsibility for any failure should not rest with the White House. 43 minutes later, the Pentagon official, Elaine McCusker, hit send on a brief but stinging reply. "You can't be serious," she wrote. "I am speechless." Next up, the section is entitled, "We Need to Hold It Up." For top officials inside the budget office, the first warning came on June 19th. Informed that the president had a problem with the aid, Blair called Russell T. Vogt, the acting head of the Office of Management and Budget. Okay, so remember at this point, now that, I guess, did they move? I mean, they never made Mulvaney actual chief of staff. He was always just acting chief of staff. But I thought he was acting chief of staff and OMB head, but maybe at some point they appointed somebody else as acting OMB head, while it became obvious that even just as acting White House chief of staff, Mulvaney was going to be too busy. Although, I don't know, we may have jumped around in time here to when Mulvaney has left, And we have a new acting OMB head for that reason. Typical of the Trump White House. The inquiry was not born of a rigorous policy process. Aides speculated that someone had shown Trump a news article about Ukraine, the Ukraine assistance. The Ukraine assistance. Not the Ukraine, but the Ukraine assistance. And he demanded to know more. Mr. Vogt and his team took to Google, the only way to find anything out in the White House, right? And came upon a piece in the conservative Washington Examiner, saying that the Pentagon would pay for weapons and other military equipment for Ukraine, bringing American security aid to the country to $1.5 billion since 2014. The money, the article noted, was coming at a critical moment. Mr. Zelensky, a one-time comedian, had called ending the armed conflict with Russia in eastern Ukraine his top priority, a move that would likely only happen if he could negotiate from a position of strength. The budget office officials had little idea of why Mr. Trump was interested in the topic, but many of the president's more senior aides were well aware of his feelings about Ukraine, because he was a Russian. He'd been indoctrinated by the Russians and was a Russian agent on top of it all. Weeks earlier, in an Oval Office meeting on May 23rd, with Mr. Sondland, Mr. Mulvaney, and Mr. Blair in attendance, Mr. Trump batted away assurances that Mr. Zelensky was committed to confronting corruption. They're all corrupt. They're all terrible people, Mr. Trump said, according to testimony in the impeachment inquiry. The United States had been planning to provide $391 million in military assistance to Ukraine in two chunks. $250 million, that's why they use the word tranche. It's a lot less gross sounding than chunks. $250 million allocated by the Pentagon for warfighting equipment, from sniper rifles to rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and $141 million controlled by the State Department to buy night vision devices, radar systems, and yet more rocket grenade launchers. Why the division? I don't know. I think at the time there was some clever explanation for why the division. It might just have been a matter of not wrecking the budget of one or the other, but splitting it a little bit between both. I thought there would be something more diplomatic sounding being paid for by the State Department. But rocket grenade launchers, that's military. I don't know why they're paying for it, but they were. By the way, the testimony to which they refer about how Trump thought that Ukrainians are all terrible, corrupt people is linked. And it might make some interesting reading perhaps over the weekend. This too, an old article, of course. Read Kurt Volker's prepared opening statement for the impeachment hearing, from the impeachment hearing, is the title of the piece. And I guess he gives details about just how indoctrinated Trump has been about his opinion of the Ukrainians. So where were we? Yes. With the money having been appropriated by Congress, it would be hard for the administration to keep it from being spent by the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. The task of dealing with the president's demands fell primarily to a group of political appointees in the West Wing and the Budget Office, most with personal and professional ties to Mulvaney. There was no public announcement that Trump wanted the assistance withheld. Neither Congress nor the Ukrainian government was formally notified. Mulvaney had first served in the administration as budget director after 3 terms, a whopping 3 terms in the House, where he earned a reputation as a firebrand conservative. The 4 top political appointees helping Mulvaney execute the hold, Mr. Vogt, Mr. Blair, Mr. Duffy, and Mark Paoletta, the budget office's top lawyer, all had extensive experience in either congressional budget politics or Republican and conservative causes. Their efforts would cause tension and, at times, conflict between officials at the Budget Office and the Pentagon, some of whom watched with growing alarm. The single largest chunk of the federal government's annual discretionary budget, some $800 billion a year, goes to the Pentagon, spy agencies, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's kind of an unfortunate lumping, but, okay. The military connection is what doesn't. The career official in charge of managing the flow of all that money for the budget office is an Afghanistan war veteran named Mark Sandy. After learning about the president's June 19th request, Mr. Sandy contacted the Pentagon to learn more about the aid package. He also repeatedly pressed Mr. Duffy about why Mr. Trump had imposed the hold in the first place. He didn't provide an explicit response on the reason Mr. Sandy testified at the impeachment inquiry. He simply said, we need to let the hold take place, and I'm paraphrasing here, and then revisit this issue with the president. From the start, budget office officials took the position that the money did not have to go out the door until the end of September, giving them time to address the president's questions. And again, here, all this is normalizing the idiot president who has no idea what's going on. As I referred to him yesterday, the basketball-faced brain fart of a president just says, do this stuff, and they're all, the mechanisms are such that until the end of the fiscal year, and then we can straighten it out and try and get the reason from them before, as long as we get it before September 30th. No reason is ever going to be forthcoming that's legitimate. You should understand that. But they're all there like, what else are we going to do? I mean, he's been declared the president. We have to, to some extent, pretend that he's allowed to do this stuff if he is. So, we'll do up to September 30th and then see what happens. It was easy enough for the White House to hold up the State Department portion of the funding. Since the State Department had not yet notified Congress of its plans to release the money, all it took was making sure that the notification did not happen. Freezing the Pentagon's $250 million portion was more difficult, since the Pentagon had already certified that Ukraine had met the requirements set by Congress to show that it was addressing its endemic corruption and notified lawmakers of its intent to spend the money. That part now coming back to me. So, on July 19th, Mr. Duffy proposed an unusual solution. Mr. Sandy would attach a footnote to a routine budget document saying the money was being temporarily withheld. This does ring a bell now. Approving such requests is routine. Mr. Sandy processed hundreds each year, but attaching a footnote to block the spending that the administration had already notified Congress was ready to go was not. Mr. Sandy said in testimony that he had never done it before in his 12 years at the agency, and there was a problem with this maneuver. Mr. Sandy was concerned it might violate a law called the Impoundment Control Act that protects Congress's spending power and prohibits the administration from blocking disbursement of the aid unless it notifies Congress, which it didn't. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Oh, here on CBS Radio. April Fools. It's Netroots Radio. All right, well, I think we're making some serious progress in this piece, and I think we can race through the rest of it. There are other things I definitely want to tell you about, and I didn't mean to spend the full day on news from 2019, but it actually is, I think, great. They should just rerun this article, which is what the person who was retweeting it basically meant for us to do. So we're complying. I wish I knew who to credit for the genius of planting this thing in my mind, but what can I tell you? I don't. But where were we? Oh, yes, right. Mr. Sandy there at OMB was concerned about what was going on. He asked about the duration of this hold that he wanted to implement with the footnote and was told there was not clear guidance on that. So that is what prompted my concern. Mr. Sandy sought advice from the top lawyers at the budget office, and now a pivotal day is coming up. It's the next section here. For a full month, the fact that Mr. Trump wanted to halt the aid remained confined primarily to a small group of officials. That ended on July 18th when a group of top administration officials meeting on Ukraine policy, including some calling in from Kyiv, learned that from a mid-level budget office official that the president had ordered the aid frozen. I and the others on this call sat in astonishment. William B. Taylor, Jr., the top United States diplomat in Ukraine, testified to House investigators. In an instant, I realized that one of the key pillars of our strong support for Ukraine was threatened. And no one knew to that point. That same day, aides on the House Foreign Affairs Committee received 4 calls from administration sources warning them about the hold and urging them to look into it. A week later came Trump's fateful July 25th call with Mr. Zelensky. Mr. Bolton, the National Security Advisor, had recommended the call take place in an effort to end the incessant lobbying from officials like Mr. Sondland that the two leaders connect. Oh, okay, that's interesting, because the other day the reporting was that Mulvaney was the one who engineered it because Bolton didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now this, I don't know, maybe that's emerged since, but contemporaneously they were reporting at the New York Times that Bolton thought the call should go forward to try and get around, I think, the idiots who were putting a hold on the funding. Because I guess he figured at that point there's no way that the person who has risen to become president of the United States is stupid enough to announce that they were unilaterally trying to withhold the aid in a call with the person that they were trying to work out aid with. Usually they'll hide the fact. I guess a normal president would be expected to hide the ball and lie and not let on that aid was being withheld in an effort to just have a nice diplomatic call with somebody, even if they intended to screw them over later. But this guy could blurt it all out, and that was maybe, probably beyond the pale at the time. It would have been problematic, and I guess if he had known about the whole... what a big blabbermouth Trump was and how he screwed up the do not congratulate instructions, and et cetera, he might have thought differently about this. Some of Mr. Trump's aides had thought the call might lead Mr. Trump to lift the freeze. But Trump did not specifically mention the hold and instead asked Zelensky to look into Mr. Biden and his son and into supposed Ukrainian involvement in the 2016 election. Among those listening to the call was Mr. Blair. So I think, again, the people who were normalizing him thought, oh, maybe it'll prompt him to lift the freeze. Because, and that's not a bad read of Trump, really, because Trump, for all his bluster, is not particularly good at direct conflict, especially with people who are, operating at his level, president of another country for whatever reason. We see, for all the bluster about firing people and that being his trademark line, he fires people via tweet and won't be in the same room with them when he does it. And I could see that they might think, when push comes to shove, Trump doesn't deal with the tension very well, and he might just stumble into lifting the freeze if he's prevailed upon in a certain way. But I guess it was not to be, because he had in mind a different plan, which, by the way, probably is good evidence against him if you were ever going to try and pursue, any kind of investigation or prosecution for what happened, despite the fact that the impeachment fell apart. But I wish we had known it at impeachment or been able to press the point. Not that it would have mattered, because people didn't care about what the evidence was, but it is actually pretty strong evidence of his intent here. Because without a preconceived plan for Trump, without his knowing that he was making this call for the purposes of extorting something from Zelensky, he might otherwise have been expected to relent on the freeze, because he's a pretty weak-minded person, and he could probably be talked out of it. But the fact that he wasn't is evidence that he went in with a set play, that the whole point of the call for Trump was the extortion, and everybody else thought the point of the call was to iron out what was happening with the aid, and it was just never about that, not for Trump. So, among the aides listening in on the call was Mr. Blair. Mr. Blair has told associates he did not make much of Trump's requests during the call for investigations. He saw the aid freeze not as a political tool, but as an extension of Trump's general aversion to foreign aid and his belief that Ukraine is rife with corruption. Just a misunderstanding of his mindset, unfortunately. Just 90 minutes after the call ended, following days of email traffic on the topic, Mr. Duffy, Mr. Sandy's boss, sent out a new email to the Pentagon where officials were impatient about getting the money out the door. His message was clear: do not spend it. Given the sensitive nature of the request, I appreciate your keeping the information closely held to those who need to know to execute the direction, Mr. Duffy wrote in his note, which was released this month to the Center for Public Integrity. But remember, again, this was a while ago. This caused immediate discomfort at the Pentagon, with a top official there noting that this hold on military assistance was coming on the same day Ukraine announced it had seized a Russian tanker, a potential escalation of the conflict between the two nations. On that same day, Mr. Sandy, having received the go-ahead from the budget office's lawyers, took the first official step to legally impose what they called a, quote, brief pause, inserting a footnote into the budget document that prohibited the Pentagon from spending any of the aid until August 5th. By that point, officials in Ukraine were getting word that something was up. At the same time, the effort to win a commitment from the Ukrainians for the investigations sought by Trump was intensifying, with Giuliani and a Zelensky aide, Andrei Yermak, meeting in Madrid on August 2nd, and the diplomats Mr. Sondland and Mr. Volker also working on the issue. Could we hear from Andrei Yermak again? Is he still working for Zelensky? I'm sure he's distracted by the war in his country, but I'm curious what he might have to say. And inside the intelligence community, a CIA officer was hearing talk about the two strands of pressure on Ukraine, including the aid freeze. Seeing how they fit together, he was alarmed enough that by August 12th, he would take the extraordinary step of laying them out in detail in a confidential whistleblower complaint. Keeping a hold on the assistance was now a top priority, so officials moved to tighten control over the money. In a very unusual step, the White House removed Mr. Sandy's authority to oversee the aid freeze. The job was handed in late July to Mr. Sandy's boss, Mr. Duffy, the political appointee, the official ultimately responsible for apportionments, but one who had little experience in the nuts and bolts of the budget office process. As the debate over the aid continued, disagreements flared. Two budget office staff members left the agency after the summer. Mr. Sandy testified that their departures were related to the aid freeze, a statement disputed by budget officials, or budget office officials. Pentagon officials, in the dark about the reason for the holdup, grew increasingly frustrated. Ms. McCusker, the powerful Pentagon budget official, notified the budget office that either $61 million of the money would have to be spent by Monday, August 12th, or it would be lost. The budget office saw her threat as a ploy to force release of the aid. At the White House, which had been looped into the dispute by the budget office, there was a growing consensus that officials could find a legal rationale for continuing the hold. But with the Monday deadline looming, it was a POTUS-level decision, one official said, so all the fault is his. And guess what happened? He did it. Complicating matters, another budget battle was escalating. Mr. Vogt was attempting to impose cuts of as much as $4 billion on the nation's overall foreign aid budget. It was an entirely separate initiative from the Ukraine freeze and was quickly abandoned, but helped the White House establish that its concern about aid was not limited to Ukraine, but it ended up being just a feint anyway. By the second week of August, Mr. Duffy had taken to issuing footnotes every few days to block the Pentagon spending. Office of Management and Budget lawyers approved each one. Arrest him. Mr. Trump spent the weekend before the Pentagon's August 12th deadline at Bedminster, his New Jersey golf resort. In a previously unreported sequence of events, Mr. Mulvaney worked to schedule a call for that day with Trump and top aides involved in the freeze, including Vogt, Bolton, and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel. But they waited to set a final time because Trump had a golf game planned for Monday morning with John Daly, the flamboyant professional golfer. That's a good way of putting it. And they did not know how long it would take. Late that morning, Ms. McCusker checked in with the budget office. Hey, any update for us? She asked in an email obtained by the Center for Public Integrity. Duffy was still waiting for an answer as of late that afternoon. Elaine, I don't have an update, he wrote back. I am attempting to get one. But he can't because it's a POTUS-level decision, and the POTUS is effing off at the golf club. The planned for conference call with the president never happened. Budget office lawyers decided that Ms. McCusker had inaccurately raised alarms about the August 12th date to try to force their hand. In Bedminster with Mr. Trump, Mr. Mulvaney finally reached the president, and the answer was clear. Trump wanted the freeze kept in place. In Washington, the whistleblower submitted his report the same day. Now the national security team intervenes. Inside the administration, pressure was mounting on Trump to reverse himself. Backed by a memo saying the National Security Council, the Pentagon, and the State Department all wanted the aid released, Bolton made a personal appeal to Trump on August 16th, but was rebuffed. On August 28th, Politico published a story reporting that the assistance to Ukraine had been frozen. After more than 2 months, the issue, the topic of fiery internal debate, was finally public. Mr. Bolton's relationship with the president had been deteriorating for months, and he would leave the White House weeks later, but on this front, he had powerful internal allies. On a sunny, late August day, Mr. Bolton, Mr. Esper, and Mr. Pompeo arrayed themselves around the resolute desk of the Oval Office to present the united front, the leaders of the president's national security team seeking to convince him to face to face that freeing up the money for Ukraine was the right thing to do. One by one, they made their case. This is in America's interest, Mr. Bolton argued, according to one official briefed on the gathering. This defense relationship, we have gotten some really good benefits from it, Mr. Esper said, noting that most of the money was being spent on military equipment made in the United States. Mr. Trump responded that he did not believe Mr. Zelensky's promises of reform. He emphasized his view that corruption remained endemic and repeated his position that European nations needed to do more for European defense. Ukraine is a corrupt country, the president said. We are pissing away our money. The aid remained blocked. On August 31st, Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, arranged a call with Mr. Trump. Mr. Johnson had been told days earlier by Mr. Sondland that the aid would be unblocked only if the Ukrainians gave Trump the investigations he wanted. When Johnson asked Trump directly if the aid was contingent on getting a commitment to pursue the investigations, Johnson later said, Trump replied, amid a string of expletives, that there was no such demand and he would never do such a thing. Around the same time, White House lawyers informed Trump about the whistleblower's complaint regarding his pressure campaign. It's not clear how much detail the lawyers provided the president about the details of the complaint, which noted the aid freeze. Trump was scheduled to travel to Poland on September 1st to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II and had planned to get together with Zelensky. Some administration officials hoped a meeting with the new Ukrainian president in person would change Trump's mind. But a hurricane was bearing down on the United States, and Trump sent VP Mike Pence in his place. When Zelensky raised the issue with the vice president, Pence said he should speak with Trump. Behind the scenes in Warsaw, Sondland, the American envoy who was Trump's point person on getting the Ukrainians to agree to the investigations, had a blunter message. Until the Ukrainians publicly announced the investigations, he told Yermak, the Zelensky advisor, they should not expect to get the military aid. Yermak has questioned Mr. Sondland's account, it says here. And now an abrupt reversal. By late summer, top lawyers at the budget office were developing a proposed legal justification for the hold, based in part on conversations with White House lawyers as well as the Justice Department. Their argument was that lifting the hold would undermine Trump's negotiating position in his efforts to fight corruption in Ukraine, a huge central focus of his presidency, as you know. The president, the lawyers believed, could ignore the requirements of the Impoundment Control Act and continue to hold the aid by asserting constitutional commander-in-chief powers, give him authority over diplomacy. He could do so, they believed, if he determined that, based on existing circumstances, releasing the money would undermine military or diplomatic efforts. But divisions within the administration continued to widen. Mr. Bolton was opposed to using an argument proffered by administration lawyers to block the funding, and pressure from Congress was intensifying. Johnson and another influential Republican, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, were both pushing for the aid to be released, even though they're now pro-Russian, but then back to being pro-Ukrainian a couple weeks later. On a call with Mr. Portman on September 11th, Trump repeated his familiar refrain about other nations not doing enough to support Ukraine. Sure, I agree with you, Portman responded, according to an aide who described the exchange, but we should not hold that against Ukraine. We need to release these funds. Democrats in the House were gearing up to limit Trump's power to hold up the money to Ukraine, and the chairman of 3 House committees had also announced on September 9th that they were opening an investigation. Still, the White House officials did not expect anything to change, especially since Trump had repeatedly rejected the advice of his national security team. But then, just as suddenly as the hold was imposed, it was lifted. Trump, apparently unwilling to wage a public battle, told Portman he would let the money go. Because he's easy to persuade, right? Unless he has a preset plan. White House aides rushed to notify their counterparts at the Pentagon and elsewhere. The freeze had been lifted. The money could be spent. Get it out the door, they were told, probably before he changes his mind again. The debate would now begin as to why the hold was lifted, with Democrats confident they knew the answer. I have no doubt about why the president allowed the assistance to go forward. Representative Eliot Engel, Democrat of New York and then chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said, and the answer is he got caught. And that's a pretty good conclusion to the piece, and well worth, I think, the trip down memory lane. This, again, first published in December of 2019, updated in July of 2021, and newly relevant because of the escalating war between Russia and the United States, and the fact that we have a normal administration back in place again. All right. Well, that was good background. Give us something to think about over the weekend. Now, on to other topics that you should also be thinking about over the weekend. There are many of them. Let's see. Why not throw in these two things and maybe followed by, you don't know which ones I'm talking about. But why don't I read them to you? There's two wacky stories about how Republicans are terrible everywhere. And you knew that already, but here are some more examples of why. Good companion piece to what we have been reading about what was going on in Georgia and the weird situation in the elections boards in the counties there, being removed by a weird new law passed by the Republican-controlled legislature there, bulldozing over locally selected, locally appointed elections officials who happen to be Democrats and replacing them all with Republicans who just might be willing to help someone like Brad Raffensperger find missing votes that are necessary to declare Donald Trump president again. Similar story, different mechanism, and unique and quirky, to be sure, but worth finding out about. This is set in the Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania. But what Ukrainians would call the Pennsylvania, as a joke. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, whoops, get this out of the way here. I've reached my free article limit, but I've already read this article. And, all right, they're going to try and block me from it. We'll read it from out of pocket instead. Maddie Hanna, the writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, judge removes 5 Westchester school board members, not Westchester, New York, but Westchester, Pennsylvania, school board members removed in response to masking opponents' petition. This is very interesting and troubling. And the tweet that brought it to my attention was pointing out, the disinformation bullies are winning again, and we gotta stop this from happening. Check this story out. A Chester County judge has ordered the removal of 5 of the 9 Westchester school board members, elected school board members, granting a petition from residents opposed to masking requirements. In an order on Tuesday, Judge William Mahon, Mahon, M-A-H-O-N, which very often is pronounced man. Judge William Mahon said the 5 members, Sue Tiernan, Joyce Chester, Kate Shaw, Karen Herman, and Darrell Durnell, were removed after failing to respond to the February petition against them. This is actually a great procedural story, as well as an annoying story about anti-masking sentiment and being a disinformation bully and being able to effect too much change based on the fact that you're an anti-science idiot, but have accidentally stumbled into a procedural victory. Ready for this? The petition was filed by Beth Ann Rosica, R-O-S-I-C-A, a Westchester parent, you gotta listen to the parents, who had opposed district pandemic measures and who is executive director of Back to School PA, Pennsylvania, that is, of course, the pro-school reopening political action committee backed by a Bucks County donor. And can I point out, we're all pro-school reopening, but okay, fine. Who poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into school board races across the state in November. One of the 5 members ordered to be removed, Chester. This is actually a person named Chester who lives in Chester County. It's not their county, but it's Joyce Chester of West Chester, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Boy, a lot going on here. One of the 5 members ordered to be removed, Chester, a Democrat, won re-election in November with 5,400 votes, or 63% of the vote in her region, compared to 3,100 votes for her Republican challenger. So overwhelming favorite, booted from office by a judge. Similar petitions, by the way, pending against board members in 4 other Chester County school districts, including Downingtown, Great Valley, what's this one? Tredyffrin? I don't know. It sounds like a nasal spray. Tredyffrin. Tredyffrin. Tredyffrin Easttown. Okay. And Coatesville, Rosica said, I did not believe that they had the legal authority to mask our children. I mean, putting aside the fact that they actually won, they won for procedural reasons, which is annoying, and maybe the judge, too, I think, may have made some mistakes about what the remedies that were really available to them. They're on paper, these are remedies outlined by statute, but, you know, he could have I think, exercised some authority to stay the remedies pending some further proceedings, which would have been a wiser course of action, but I think he got pissed off. And maybe he's an anti-masker himself. I don't know. But get a load of what this lady is saying. I mean, she really should have kept it on the, kept it on the down low, as the kids used to say back when they were kids, but now they're adults and the real kids say something different, I'm sure. But she should have, just stuck with the, hey, I'm against masking. I think it's about time to get rid of the masks. But instead, she lets the crazy flow. And I guess if she knew she was going to win, she would have had the option of saying, no, I'm doing this for totally reasonable reasons. But instead, she says, I did not believe that they had the legal authority to mask our children. I want to ensure they will never be forcibly masked again, Rosica said of her reason for filing the petition against the Westchester board members. While masking in Westchester is now optional, as in schools across the region, Rosica noted that the district's health and safety plan includes a provision to return to mask requirements if COVID-19 transmission rates increase. And in her mind, that's a bad thing. Anyway, later on, I think there's more exposition of just how crazy her mask position is. If not, I'll fill you in. Lawyers for the school board members filed a motion to reconsider Tuesday night, saying the court had adopted the wrong timeline for setting a due date to respond to the petition. It wasn't immediately clear what outcome their motion, which asks the judge to reinstate the board members and give them until April 5th to file a response, could have. In a message to the community Tuesday night, Superintendent Bob Sokolowski said that special counsel to the district is in the process of preparing a substantive response on behalf of those school board members named in the petition. While we do not have all the answers at this time, please be assured that the Westchester Area School District and I remain deeply committed to the mission of educating and inspiring the best of our students. Sokolowski said, not the best of our students, best in our students. It's different. He noted that the order called the ruling a procedural result, adding that it does not address any of the allegations made in the complaint. And it's important when you read what those allegations are. The petition refers to masks as, quote, unapproved medical devices. That's some dramatic reading of it. They're unapproved medical devices, not just, pieces of cloth or whatever the hell they're made of now. It also argues that schools aren't allowed to exclude children who have COVID-19, and says that by requiring masks without informed consent, board members have committed, quote, medical battery against children. Not a thing, but okay. It also claims that the board implemented policies falling under the definition of suffocating and child abuse. So this is an attempt at murdering all the children and physically abusing them. I don't know. Maybe there is such a thing as medical battery. I don't think so. It's just garbage, but whatever. The petition was written by Shannon Grady, a Downingtown parent. Listen to the parents. Who said she felt board members hadn't listened to her, and other parents calling for an end to mask requirements. Minus the fact that they've ended the mask requirements. I see your point, Shannon. You're totally right. They didn't listen to you. But not listening to you is not actually what they're responsible for doing. And it's not always manifested by voting your way. Like, I listen to you, but you're a crazy a-hole and we're not doing what you say. Or, in this case, I listen to you and you're a crazy a-hole, and we're going to do what you say, but for different reasons. But you won't take yes for an answer, so here you are petitioning for our removal. Now, ordinarily you would say, you can't just petition to say, well, I think they should be thrown off the board. But as it turns out, in Pennsylvania, you can. How dumb is that? Well, we're finding out. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We continue on with the reading of this wacky article from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And, so Shannon Grady, apparently identified as the author of this petition, which shouldn't have worked, but did because procedural reasons. A crazy-ass petition to remove 5 members of the Westchester County School Board, or Westchester Area School Board, I don't know, and from Chester County, but it's a municipality, Westchester, from their offices, even though one of them was just elected and won 2/3 of the vote, but bounced out now, according to this judge. So here's the deal. The petition written by Shannon Grady, Downingtown parent, who said she felt like board members hadn't listened to her, even though they did. They just didn't agree with her. I started the research on this back in August, so she did her own research. But part of it is right, this research. It's weird. When I realized the schools were going to continue to mask children, so I'm going to do some research on how to get rid of them. I'm not going to do any research on whether or not masks are a good idea, but I am going to do research on how to get rid of the people trying to keep our kids from dying or killing the rest of our families. So that's what I'll spend my time on. Reading Pennsylvania's public school code as she tried to determine, do they actually have the authority to require masks, I found that loophole for removal of the school board. Grady's petition, which she shared with Rosica and parents in other districts, uses an apparently little-known provision in the school code that allows for the removal of board members, quote, for failure to organize or neglect of duty. Pardon me. Now, that's the sort of thing that somebody like that would seize onto ordinarily and say, well, this is it. This is definitely neglect of duty. It is, of course, the opposite of neglect of duty for them to act, to say that, leading scientists say that masking, at least up until this point, X point in time, is best for all of us and reduces transmission of disease. But then at some later point, when prevalence of the disease is lower, we can make the masks optional, which we did do. And she obviously says, well, that's neglect of duty because I said to them in the meeting that they shouldn't be making kids masks because I read something on the internet that horse paste works, so we don't need masks. That's neglect of duty. No, that's not neglect of duty. That's just them being normal and you being a wacko, and that being the normal consequence of interactions between normal people on a school board and wackos in the audience who think, I've done my own research, whatever. So how did this work? How did this end up working? Under the law, any 10 resident taxpayers, and we should at this point be looking into whether or not they've paid their taxes and paid them adequately. That would be interesting if there were only 10 names on the petition. There are probably more, but can you cobble together 10 of them that have really, truly honored their tax obligations? That'd be worth doing, honestly, as a defense to this thing. I know they don't have time to deal with stuff like that, but in a perfect world, I bet you could find out that there weren't 10 fully paid up taxpayers on that list and invalidate the petition that way, but maybe not. Maybe they're just good, honest folk who are dumb. Under the law, any 10 resident taxpayers can file a petition with the Court of Common Pleas, and the court, quote, shall grant a rule upon the school directors, returnable in not less than 10 or more than 20 days, to show cause why they should not be removed from office. It also says board members shall have at least 5 days' notice of the granting of the rule. So what it is here, you can file any dumbass petition you want. I think they should be removed because they're all Martians, right? Nothing that says you can't file that petition as long as 10 resident taxpayers are willing to sign it. And then the Court of Common Pleas shall grant a rule, that's the way they put it, upon the school directors, returnable in not less than 10 and not more than 20 days, to show cause why they shouldn't be removed from office. So yes, you would have to say, all right, well, I have up to 20 days, I guess, according to my quick reading of this, to demonstrate to the Court of Common Pleas, no, I'm not a Martian. That's not a real thing, and I shouldn't be removed from the board because the petition is bogus. But what happens here is nobody answers. Well, okay. Rosica said her petition was served to board members on February 22nd. In a March 15th order, Mahan, the judge, however we pronounce it, whenever I see it as McMahon, they pronounce it as McMahon. I don't know whether it was always just man without the Mick, M-A-H-O-N. And I think I've actually known some people whose last name may have been that, now that I think about it. And they just said Mahan. But I don't know. I don't know about this particular judge. Doesn't matter. You know how to spell his name. But the judge, in a March 15th order, said that a respondent shall file a verified answer to the petition within 20 days of service upon the respondent. I mean, it's not clear that he has any particular feelings about this petition. It's just, all right, the law says they got to respond, as dumb as this petition is. And so the ball's in your court, school board. Last week, Rosica wrote to Mahan, whatever the goddamn guy's name is. It's the name that I'm having trouble with. The judge might be normal, but although he makes a bad decision here. Anyway, she writes to the judge asking for clarification on the time frame. By her count, she said, 20 business days from service of the petition, if they did that correctly, which is another way to attack this, was March 22nd. So, what's up, Judge? The 20 days have passed. The judge then issued his order removing the board members on Tuesday. You're out. You're out of office. Saying that despite the important issues raised in the petition, I mean, masking is an important issue. Their reasons for opposing them are not important because they're dumb. But okay, maybe he is an anti-masker. But despite the important issues raised in the petition, although, well, really, one of the important reasons, you could read it this way. One of the important issues raised in the petition was you should be kicked out of office. Yes, the masking thing, it's all dumb, and that's not important, but removing you from office is what's asked in the petition, so that's important, right? Despite the important issues raised in the petition, the members had failed to comply with the rules of civil procedure and his March 15th order. He gave Rosica and the board members 7 days to each submit a list of 5 proposed replacements. I'm not certain that the law requires that he give the petitioners and non-respondents the opportunity to do that, but maybe. I don't know that he made that up out of whole cloth or anything. But, as crazy as this petition was, yet apparently it got a respond, and they just didn't. But it says here, lawyers for the board members said in their motion for reconsideration that the 20 days should have been counted from when the judge issued the rule on March 15th, not the date of service of the petition, which would have given them until April 4th to respond. Parents like Grady are now watching to see what happens with petitions in other districts. Grady said the judge is also handling her petition against Downingtown board members, which she said she had originally filed in December. But not being a lawyer, she said she made some procedural errors. Everybody's making them. The judge gave me 2 lifelines with it, Grady said, allowing her to refile. A physiologist, she said she was frustrated she wasn't allowed to testify in a lawsuit against the Tredyffrin/Easttown district last year when she proposed as a witness to perform a demonstration in which she would put a carbon dioxide meter under her mask. Why? No one knows. Lawyers for the district called it junk science. A federal judge rejected parents' call for an order against that district with claims that masking violated their religious beliefs and that the district couldn't order masking because masks are, quote, unapproved medical devices. In Chester County, man was accused by a defense attorney last year of failing to wear a mask in the courthouse, despite county requirements to do so. So he may be a bit of an anti-masker himself. Billy Penn, and I don't know what that is exactly. I think, William Penn, Billy Penn, I think it might be, maybe it's another website or newsletter, not as opposed to a person who's actually named Billy Penn, because they don't say who that is. Billy Penn reported that Mahan, the judge, sought to have an 88-year-old woman arrested after her attorney said she missed a court appearance due to coronavirus symptoms. Sheriff's deputies found the woman too frail to detain, according to the report. So it seems like the judge may be a bit of a, anti-masker and COVID denier himself, which possibly explains why he wouldn't entertain or bring up a motion on his own to say, all right, I know that the law says the petition, is valid and that I can throw people out of office if they don't respond, but this is a crackpot thing. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll order them expelled from office as the statute requires, but I'm going to stay my order pending a ruling on, if they want to file for a temporary restraining order, preventing my order from being implemented pending appeal, let's say, or something like that. But instead, he kind of just went right to it. But he did modify it a little bit and said, all right, well, they're out of office, but I don't know. Everybody tell me who they would like to replace them. But I don't know I don't know what the rest of the statute empowers them to do. I mean, those are elected officials. I don't know if you can just pick names out of a hat. But what a wacky situation, and annoying because, like, if you had just responded on time, although they still claim that the on time thing is still up in the air, and they may end up being right, and that might be what they want to appeal on. But how annoying is this? As I said, it was astonishing just because it was a story of anti-science disinformation bullies using the courts, and it's infuriating to see them come up with such a dumb petition and making up, terminology that doesn't exist and pretending that some sort of weird interpretation of, international law and the Constitution says we're right, and they're not right, but because somebody made a procedural error, they end up looking like they're right. And now they think they can do this everywhere. And now there's going to be people filing these things all over the place, not just in Pennsylvania, but they'll be filing these things in other states too, without any understanding of the fact that this is unique to Pennsylvania law and probably shouldn't even be Pennsylvania law based on this, and that it only worked because the board, well, they think they still have time to respond, but they didn't respond, so I don't know, very weird. Pair it with this, and we'll give you another story of disinformation bullies not yet being right, but it's hard not to worry about these things. This is just ultimately a story about someone who is running for Attorney General. And where are they doing that? They are in Wisconsin, though this is being reported on by their neighbors in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. But here's the story. So she's just a candidate. So, whatever. We don't have to worry about her just yet, but that's always worrisome because she's running as a Republican and she's nuts, which means she could be the nominee, which means she could win because it's happening in Wisconsin. All right. Again, in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Molly Beck reporting there on the story of the attorney who backs election decertification. You know which one that is, right? The 2020 election. That Wisconsin should rescind its electoral college votes for Joe Biden and recast them for Donald Trump. And they still continue. We all focused on the crazy cyber ninja audit in Arizona, but Wisconsin continues to have Republican electeds working to do this thing that doesn't exist, decertifying the Wisconsin results. But an attorney who backs election decertification enters attorney general race to investigate doctors who won't prescribe ivermectin. This gives away all the crazy in one single headline. A Chippewa Falls attorney who is a key player in a movement to take the impossible step of decertifying the 2020 election is running for attorney general, but not even chiefly for that. Instead, running on a platform of using the office to prosecute doctors who did not administer the anti-parasite drug ivermectin to dying COVID patients and instead gave them other treatments. That's right. Karen is her real name. Sorry, Karen. Our Karens. I apologize to you. But Karen Mueller, maybe Mueller, I don't know if she pronounces it that way, but spelled the same way as Robert. But Karen Mueller is joining the race's Republican primary after unsuccessfully suing in November of 2020 to overturn the presidential election result and writing a memo in January supporting State Representative Tim Ramthun's call to decertify the election, and analysis that has been widely circulated among decertification supporters. Other attorneys and legal experts have concluded the idea is impossible and illegal, and it's good to know. Mueller said in an interview, she's launching a campaign in order to do what? Something completely different. Investigate 6 Wisconsin hospitals for their doctors' decisions not to administer ivermectin to COVID-19 patients. She would not disclose the names of the hospitals or reveal details of her allegations because it's just her platform for running for attorney general. And why should you share that, right? The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has not approved the use of ivermectin to prevent or treat COVID-19 infections and has warned users about its potential risks to those who are infected. And we mentioned yesterday another big study concluding once again that the stuff just doesn't work. I did see somebody on Twitter pointing out maybe it's time for a study not just of whether it works or not, but on the long-term effects of people who lapped it up, literally, eating the horse paste out of a tube and even taking the human form of it daily when apparently it's for anti-parasitic use. It is apparently supposed to be used like twice a year, but people were taking it twice daily for who knows how long, and maybe there could be some effects. We should check into that. Someone should look into that. I don't know anything about it, but a lot of people are talking about it. All right, so that's what she wants to do, is investigate these doctors. Mueller said the CDC and FDA are liars and that families have called her begging for help, tears streaming down their eyes, begging for help, trying to figure out what to do because their loved ones were in hospitals and the families believed that those loved ones were basically being murdered and they had the drugs withheld from them. I am running for attorney general because of potential homicides in hospitals, because of vaccines, so-called vaccines, she said. Mueller, who said she took ivermectin last year while infected with COVID-19, said she did not consult a doctor or scientist to analyze whether the deaths or illnesses could have been prevented by the drug that doctors and researchers say has not been proven to be effective against the coronavirus. She said a trial would root out the facts of the situation. Well, they will, but they won't do any justice unless we throw her off the cliff at the end. Patrick Remington, director of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Preventive Medicine Residency Program, said doctors who did not prescribe ivermectin to COVID-19 patients are upholding the Hippocratic oath to do no harm to patients by making decisions according to the consensus of available credible credible medical research. We strive to get it right. We do the best job we can and to do no harm, and this is an example that would be unthinkable to me, to ask a physician to prescribe a medicine that is at best ineffective and at worst harmful, Remington said. There are valid debates about the best ways to treat a serious illness, and science is iterative, that as we go along, we learn by experimentation, we learn by carefully conducted research, he said. Ivermectin has undergone that scrutiny from early anecdotal evidence that it might be effective to well-conducted scientific studies that show that not only is it not effective, but it can be harmful, and no credible medical organization or professional organization recommends it, Remington said. A large clinical trial published Wednesday involving about 3,500 people infected with COVID-19 showed ivermectin did not lower the incidence of medical admission to hospital due to a progression of COVID-19 or of prolonged emergency department observation among outpatients with an early diagnosis. This study compared about 1,300 people in Brazil who received either ivermectin or a placebo, and the rest received a different treatment. Retail prescriptions for ivermectin surged in late 2020 before vaccines were widely available, and after a catastrophic surge of COVID-19 cases, in December of 2020, U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, back here again on the show, held a Senate hearing in which physician witnesses touted the drug as a COVID treatment and claimed positive research about ivermectin was being ignored. Pierre Kory, K-O-R-Y, a Wisconsin physician and one of ivermectin's most vociferous promoters, testified at Johnson's hearing that if people took the drug, they would not get sick. 8 months later, despite taking ivermectin weekly, Kory came down with COVID-19, which is like case closed, right? But no, here we are. Mueller cites Kory's opinion in her effort to pursue civil penalties and, if elected, criminal charges against doctors who have refused to prescribe the drug in cases where patients died. What I would do if I became Attorney General is I would open investigations into those deaths, and if the facts were substantiated, which they have never been and won't be, I would probably bring charges against the people that were responsible for this, Mueller said. She said she's working on a civil lawsuit against multiple healthcare systems with multiple plaintiffs, but declined to disclose details. In October, Mueller represented the family of a Waukesha County man, it's always Waukesha, who was infected with COVID-19 in their pursuit of an order forcing Aurora healthcare officials to honor a prescription for ivermectin written by a doctor not authorized to practice medicine at the Aurora Hospital, where the man was in a drug-induced coma and breathing with a ventilator. In a split decision, the Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected Mueller's petition to bypass an appeals court and bring the case to the state's highest court. The man is now recovering, Mueller said. In November of 2020, Mueller asked the state Supreme Court to throw out the results of the presidential election, because why not do that too, because of the use of ballot drop boxes, because the use of ballot drop boxes were illegal in her view. So everybody has to listen to me. And if they don't listen to me, then I'm petitioning to remove them from office. Because I think I read the Constitution right. The court rejected the petition from Mueller, but in a recent ruling barred the use of drop boxes in the April 5th and subsequent elections because state law is silent on whether they are allowed. A final ruling is pending. And here we are again. Federal courts in Wisconsin already rejected this, but the state courts in Wisconsin say, well, we're better at interpreting the federal constitution than the federal judges. We're just going to keep going on this one. Mueller said she's running because she has not seen enough interest from the other Republican candidates. Former State Representative Andrew Jarcho, maybe I'm pronouncing it right, and Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney in COVID-19 and election issues. Not enough interest in COVID-19 or election issues. Can you believe it? She said Attorney General Josh Kaul, K-A-U-L, the Democratic incumbent, should investigate doctors' decisions surrounding COVID-19 infections. I say he should not, by the way. Kaul and Tony declined to comment. Jarcho did not respond to a request for comment. Okay, well, you have to put all that in there by way of disclaimer. And there are two different categories of failure to respond. I am calling you back to say I'm declining to comment versus I'm not even calling you back, which, as we learned from the Pennsylvania situation, always respond, even if you're responding just to say, this is ridiculous, I refuse to respond. Okay, wow. Two very weird things. I thought I would follow that up with a reading that I might be able to squeeze in from the editorial board, once again. Is this a signed version? Not the editorial board of like the Washington Post or the New York Times, but the folks writing as the editorial board, which I guess this one comes from John Storer himself, editor of the editorial board. So an editorial from the editorial board, John Storer writing this very compelling headline. Is the Republican Party a hate group? Is there a difference now that it has mainstreamed the Great Replacement? And I really should try to squeeze in this and one more thing. White supremacy is the tie that binds all GOP issues. Before I dive into the reading, I want to bring to your attention something I mentioned yesterday, and I don't know if I have fully fleshed out writing on it available, but I mentioned to you yesterday that the now open war between Disney and Ron DeSantis, but also Republicans everywhere, that their plan appears to be that if you oppose their Don't Say Gay bill and the clones of the Don't Say Gay bill that are being considered and passed in other states, that the opposition to those bills, they're simply going to come straight out and say, if you oppose it, it's because you're a pedophile. If you oppose it, it's because you're a groomer. If you oppose it, it's because you are interested in trafficking children for sex. And that's just straight up. And that's what Disney does. And their movies are about indoctrinating kids to be trafficked. They're just going straight at that, which seems insane, but is in fact becoming increasingly the mainstream Republican position on this thing. And if you don't agree with it, you better get the F out of the Republican Party and fast. And I think I saw or retweeted Paul Waldman discussing the subject this morning. I see David Atkins also tweeting on the subject. This was yesterday, of course, but it comes to my attention in the morning. You are watching in real time as mainstream conservatism warms itself up to embracing QAnon's liberals are pedophiles doctrine wholesale. The reasons are simple. One, QAnon has been the main pipeline to making GOP crossover voters. And two, it justifies any fascist response. Contrary to, and that's in quotes, their response, contrary to some popularist beliefs, Trumpist crossover votes have come far more from QAnon indoctrination than from normie median voters getting turned off by woke leftists. So why not lean into it if you lack moral compunction? It's also directly tailored to existing white dominionist nationalist narratives, intersecting with broad anti-Semitic, patriarchal, and anti-urbanist narratives. It makes it easy for folks who don't want to pay taxes for school lunches to pretend they're doing it for the kids. But also, crucially, it's the projection. There is no culture of child abuse and grooming more insidious than conservative religion, from Roy Moore to Dennis Hastert to Matt Gaetz to the priest scandals. These men have always predated on children as their prerogative of power. Like the quiverful Duggar family and FLDS, the whole idea is to make women and girls the property of powerful older men and their sons, forcing them to have babies as early as possible in direct transfer of ownership from their fathers. Boys are frequent victims of sexual hazing. Conservative small town and Friday night lights cultures are rife with sexual abuse of children, and they know it. It's just the right kind, in service of the patriarchal power structures, and it's kept quiet under the rug, repented for on Sundays, and recommitted on Mondays. It's no accident that teen pregnancy is far lower in liberal counties and states than conservative ones. Kids in liberal communities have better outcomes and suffer less abuse. The institutionalized grooming is almost entirely on the religious right, and they know it. But they play up this angle because it preys on their fears, because they know their kids despise their bigoted values systems, because they project their evils in their own families and communities, and because it justifies intended policies of bloodlust against liberals. And make no mistake, they will absolutely carry out pogroms based on the projected QAnon libels as far as they are allowed when in power. And in the hands of Trump, a man credibly accused of raping a 14-year-old, by the way, and going into teen locker rooms to see them naked. It's no accident. As they might say, it's all part of the plan. There's a bit more to this. You can read the rest of the tweet thread yourself, and it gets in the way of our reading the fascinatingly titled "Is the Republican Party a Hate Group?" piece from the editorial board. But I recommend that to your attention as well. He does a great job in tying some disparate policy ideas, mishmash as they are, together. They should be read as a piece and read together, and we'll continue to explore this theme because Republicans are going to continue to push it. Just wanted you to be aware of it before the weekend happened, because by the time we're back here on Monday, I believe, it will have gotten far worse. We'll see what Justice Putnam has to tell you next, of course, on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let me see what I can cram in before we end transmission in just, a minute or so.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this one? A Pennsylvania GOP Senate candidate repeated the false claim that he served as an Army Ranger. Gee whiz. A National Security Agency employee has been charged with mishandling classified material. Not Donald Trump, he did that too. And a historian sued New York prisons over the ban of a Pulitzer Prize-winning book about the Attica uprising. Next.